Okay, good morning. I'm Alice Newland, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County, I welcome you to our hot topic today, Innovative Solutions to Attainable Housing. This program is being recorded and will appear on our League website. We are very fortunate to have as a member of the League, Diana Shoemaker. She's president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity for Manatee County, and she is very familiar with Manatee County and its housing issues, be it homelessness, affordable rentals, or attainable housing for home ownership. Diana and Helen Anderson have also recently become co-chairs of the Social Issues Committee. We are not only looking for this program to be educational, but also it may prove to move forward something substantive for Manatee County. Diana is our moderator today, so Diana.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you and to talk about this really, really important topic. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing our wonderful speakers for today because I want them to speak, have as much time to speak about themselves and the programs they serve. But I just want to let you know that our three speakers today include Frank Wells, who's the Chief Impact Officer for Bright Community Trust in Pinellas County. Bethany Snyder is the Senior Communications Specialist at Built for Zero, which sounds like a really exciting program that we would like to hear more about. And Geri Lopez, or Geraldine Lopez, from the Manatee County Redevelopment and Economic Opportunity Department in Manatee County. So thanks to all of you for being here today. So we'll start with introductions, talking a little bit about your programs. We've asked the speakers to speak about 10 minutes. They have some PowerPoints as well. Afterwards, I have a couple questions that I'd like to throw out to the speakers to get some dialogue going. And at the end, we'll take some questions. I have some questions that came in, but some questions from the participants. And I ask that if you have questions that you put them in the chat, and I'll do my best with hopefully Alice's help to catch all those questions as we have time. So welcome to everybody. Let's go ahead and start with Bethany. It's on the spectrum of housing. Homelessness is one of the important elements that we need to look at on that spectrum. So Bethany, please tell us more about your program and your work with that program. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Okay, good. I see lots of nods. Great. So I'm Bethany Snyder with Community Solutions, and we are a national nonprofit that works to end homelessness. We believe that it is possible to end homelessness, and we have communities that are doing this and proving this every day across the country. So we run an initiative called Built for Zero. And Built for Zero is a program, we don't like to call it a program, it's a movement, an initiative where communities volunteer. It's a coalition of the willing, as we say. Communities sign up to be part of this program, and they are committed to ending homelessness through our specific methodology. And our methodology really focuses on data, taking the anonymity out of homelessness, bringing all the players together, etc. So I'll get into that in a few minutes. But first, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Built for Zero program. We have over 80 communities that are working with our in this initiative right now. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see. We have 4 in Florida. Here we go. Great. So this is all on our website. I'm going to be using our website today to show you some information about our organization. So again, we are run an initiative called Built for Zero that has over 80 communities that are working towards ending homelessness. You can see down here, and these are the ones that are in our part of our movement in Florida. So we have West Palm Beach, St. John's, North Central, Jacksonville, Clay County, and then Tallahassee, Leon County. We focus our efforts on specific populations. So we work communities first, identify which population they are going to work towards solving homelessness in. And so we focus on the veterans population. the chronic homeless population, and then also then youth and family. And so when communities join Built for Zero, they identify which population they are going to work on. And so we have had 13 communities that have ended veteran or chronic homelessness. Our Built for Zero program started in 2015, I believe, so in the last 5 years. 48 communities have achieved a measurable reduction in homelessness, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And our 79 communities have achieved quality real-time data. So one of the ways that this Built for Zero differentiates itself from other programs that are working in homelessness is that we have a specific methodology that we use that is really focused on data. It's a data-driven methodology. Oh, here you can see some of the communities that have ended veteran homelessness and chronic homeless, and we've had 2 that have ended both. And I think what's interesting when you look at this list is these are not some of the communities you'd think would be on the forefront of ending homelessness. We have Lynchburg, Virginia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Fort Myers, Florida, Riverside, California, Rockford, Illinois, Norman, Oklahoma. And so this is based on our specific methodology that I've said 1,000 times is data driven. So when communities join this movement, they get an improvement coach that works with them to implement these specific key pillars. The first one is one of the challenges in ending homelessness is that there's no single actor that's fully accountable for ending homelessness in a community. So you can think about your own community. There's probably a United Way, a Lutheran Social Services, a Catholic Social Services. There's probably many organizations that are serving the homeless, but they may not be talking to each other. They may not be coordinated, and not one single organization is responsible for ending homelessness. So the first thing is bring together an integrated command team. So first, our organizations bring all those people together, the county, the city, these nonprofit organizations, the social service organizations, all to the same table, and are like to get together and decide we're going to end homelessness for a specific population. And then we have community level measurement. We always say it's hard to know if you're making progress if you're not measuring something, right? So this is where they figure out who is experiencing homelessness in their community. There is this measurement called the PIT count. That's the point in time count that every community does in January. And it's one day or one night, one day of the year where many outreach workers go out and literally count how many unsheltered and sheltered homeless folks are there. So sheltered homeless folks are people in shelters, and unsheltered are people who are living on the street or couch surfing, etc. to find out. But we know that homelessness is a dynamic situation, and that one night is not going to tell you the breadth of the problem or how it's actually manifesting in your community. And then they create a comprehensive real-time by name data list. So what this does is it takes the anonymity out of homelessness. And everyone around the table looks at who is experiencing homelessness in our community and what do they need to become housed. So for example, if you do have these various communities around the table, 3 of them might be serving John in 1 week, right? Maybe one organization saw him on Monday, another one fed him lunch on Tuesday, and another one saw him on Friday. Obviously, that's not a good use of our resources, nor is it helping John find housing. So it's really about when we have that command center team and we have a comprehensive real-time by name data set, you can actually see where the challenges are in your housing homeless response system. Is your issue because you have so much influx, or is it because there isn't enough affordable housing, or is it because there's an economic downturn? Like, it really helps you figure out what is the actual problem and how to solve it. And then you find the strategic data-driven housing investments. For veterans, is this VASH houses, VASH vouchers? Is this affordable housing? Do you need more supportive housing? So our whole methodology is really built around what are the unique challenges in your community to solving homelessness, and how do we create those solutions to do it? I'm not sure. Can someone let me know where I am on time?
Couple more minutes. Just
Okay.
a couple more minutes.
So again, another thing that we do is not only are we helping communities solve homelessness, but we're really focused on measuring reductions in homelessness. So recently, Charlotte, North Carolina, reduced veteran homelessness by 30%. They haven't reached zero homelessness. I'm going to talk about that definition, but they've been making reductions to it. And so we have this, for the last few minutes, I'm just going to talk about our definition of homelessness. Obviously, homelessness is a dynamic social issue. We've talked about that. And so we have a data point called functional zero. And so all of our communities that we work with are reaching towards reaching functional zero for homelessness. And why we say that is because while I do think the United States, we can solve homelessness, when a community reaches functional zero, it doesn't mean you're not going to see another person experiencing homelessness on the street. What it just means is that your community is set up to make homelessness rare and brief and short-lived when it occurs. So when someone enters homelessness, you already have a homeless response system that's set up to identify that person quickly and find them the kind of housing they need quickly. So it's about setting up your homeless response system to make homelessness brief, rare, and short-lived. So by reaching functional zero, every community has a different numerator that can be, but what that means is you have less people experiencing homelessness than you have the ability to house, if that makes sense. So it's called functional zero, and you can read more about that on our website. But I think I've come to the end of my time, so I'll take questions later, and so happy to share this with you.
Definitely, thank you. That's tremendous information, and it's great to see that there's communities that are actually reaching the goal that so many of us want to achieve. So thank you for sharing it. Frank, let's have you speak next.
Oh, I have to.
You've got to give him the ability to host.
There we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Bethany.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Diana. I appreciate the introduction, and Bethany, let me know when I've got control and I can, there we go, share my screen.
You've got control now.
Oh boy, the power, I love it. Okay, let's see if this gets us here. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So hi, everybody. I'm Frank Wells. I serve as Chief Impact Officer of Bright Community Trust. Bright was started in 2008 out of Pinellas County government to work on housing access, housing affordability, and related community development issues. We have since expanded to serve Hillsborough County. We have had a few conversations over the years about coming down across the bridge to work with you all in Manatee. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've expanded to serve Central Florida, Osceola, Orange, Seminole counties, setting up a regional housing trust centered on Orlando that we call Housed. So that's the logo you'll see on the right side of my screen. Mm-hmm. And then also, we've started to do some work down in the Southwest Florida, Charlotte County, Lee County, Collier County, the Port Charlotte, Fort Myers, Naples corridor. A few years ago, we were doing some strategic planning work, and I love how this aligns with what Bethany was talking about a systemic approach to solving these kinds of big complex issues around housing. Our founding CEO, Anthony Jones, that some of you will know, was talking to a retreat that we had with the full board and staff and some consultants about a project to do 46 homes all in one neighborhood. And one of the consultants said, I got to stop you for a second. Maybe this is a dumb question because I'm not a housing person and I'm not from Pinellas County. So pardon me if this is an ignorant question to ask, but is 46 houses going to really move the needle on the need for affordable housing in your county? Now, those of you who know Anthony served as Director of Community Development for Pinellas County. Anthony laughed and said, well, no, that number would be more like, I don't know, 12,000, and you would think you're making a good start. Mm-hmm. And this guy said, well, okay, so are we here today to talk about where the next 46 houses come from? Or are we here today to talk about where the next 12,000 houses come from? Because those are two very different conversations for two very different organizations. So you're essentially here today in your strategic planning work to decide which one you want to be when you grow up. Mm-hmm. It was a really fascinating, provocative question, and it has really shaped where we've come over the last 3.5 years since that strategic planning work. to start thinking about not just how does an individual project work for an individual organization like Bright, like Housed, like Habitat for Humanity, like all the other organizations doing really great project-based work, but who's putting together that comprehensive regional housing blueprint? So I want to talk a little bit about that as we go through this presentation. I'm trying to get my, there we go, slides to advance. So here's how we look at the problem, right? We know that a family that spends too much on housing doesn't have enough left over to cover all these other critical costs, whether that's transportation, food, healthcare, education, childcare, you name it. So many of these major problems for families, so many of these social determinants of health, you'll sometimes hear them called, track back to too much goes out the door the first of the month to pay the rent or the mortgage, to pay those utility bills, and not enough is left over than to pay all the other bills, and that's very detrimental. We also know that a lot of those costs wind up falling on the public sector. These aren't just individual household level problems, and really that becomes burdensome for our business and our regional economy. It's really hard to hire the people that you need to grow a business. It's really hard to recruit new businesses to the area when the workforce doesn't have the kind of housing supply that it needs. So that becomes a major limiting factor. And to give you an idea of the size of it, I'd love to hear from you, if you're not muted now. How many households in Manatee County do you think spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs? 30% is what we would consider the threshold for affordable or unaffordable. Anybody have a number?
Geri, I bet Geri does.
Somebody take a guess.
According to the Alice report, it's 44% Manatee County.
Yeah, it's a total of over 44,000 households. And so when we think about attacking this problem as 146 home development at a time, right, we're dealing with 1/1000th of the problem without any kind of overarching plan. I thought it would be helpful to share with you some of what we've done in conjunction with our partners in Central Florida that include several cities and counties, the Central Florida Foundation, which is the regional community foundation, a bunch of nonprofit partners like Habitat of Orlando and Osceola County, the university and the community college and so forth. Here's what we see happening, and this is happening in regions all around Florida. I just happen to have these numbers at hand for Central Florida. We're seeing a huge growth in the number of households that are cost burdened, that spend too much of what they earn on housing, and that has gotten progressively worse through the Great Recession in the early 2000s. These numbers go through 2019. We are certainly seeing a rise in these numbers through the pandemic with all the unemployment that we're seeing as well. So how would you create a really strategic initiative at a regional level to answer this? Well, first, you've got to get the data together that tells you what kind of housing assets do we currently have, who lives in those, how much do they earn, and how much of that do they spend on housing? And so how does that inform what we need to be building? And just as crucially, what kind of housing assets do we need to be preserving in years to come? This is a 5, 10, 15, 20-year kind of conversation. What kind of policies then help us build more homes less expensively, more quickly to answer these needs? What kind of funding would be required to do that? And particularly, how do we incentivize the private market to build more of the kind of housing that we need, both for rent and for sale, at a neighborhood by neighborhood kind of basis? How do we incorporate resiliency and other sustainability factors? We know that these are crucial both from an environmental perspective and from an economic and social equity perspective. And then how do we talk about this? Sometimes we can have the best project, we have the land, we have the funding, we have a great architect, engineer, builder, and we don't have a good communication strategy, and the project loses out when the neighbors say, oh, sure, affordable housing is a big deal, but it doesn't belong in our neighborhood. That's a communications challenge that sometimes is just as important as all the other hard construction factors. And then how do we build up both the for-profit and the nonprofit and the public sector capacity to deliver a solution like this over a multi-year, multi-decade kind of horizon. I love that we've already introduced this by talking about the whole spectrum of housing need, not just specifically affordable housing as funded by specific programs like tax credit development, but really addressing everything from housing that supports people experiencing homelessness all the way through rental housing and into attainable home ownership solutions in various neighborhoods. We need to paint a complete picture and start driving toward that. One of our initiatives in Central Florida, I think, is pretty interesting, is working with a variety of partners to build a $100 million housing opportunity fund. Now, this is below market rate debt, equity, and philanthropy dollars that are intended to incentivize the construction of more homes that are more affordable at a variety of price points. It's intended to be flexibly configured so that it can address different kinds of funding gaps, because the gaps look very different for the very lowest incomes, and they look a little bit different when we're talking about acquisition and rehab work, preserving existing housing assets, and it looks different again when we're talking about incentivizing home ownership opportunities for people that right now don't have a chance to buy a home and then start building up some equity. Our vision then is, how do we talk about 10 years from now, fewer families spending more than what they have, more than half of what they earn on housing, so that the situation is predictably better in the aggregate, not worse, because we know where that trajectory has been over the last 10 years, and it's not a pretty picture. So then our mission is to organize that comprehensive regional housing blueprint in partnership with the public sector, with nonprofits and for-profits, to create a collective impact model that shares a single yardstick to measure how much progress we're making. Our Central Florida target, to give you all an idea of how big a plan this is to catalyze the construction or preservation of 25,000 homes at a variety of affordability levels over 10 years, while filling some specific gaps in the development market. That means things like working on transit-oriented development. It means working on improving home ownership for people in that moderate income range. We serve as the lead for regional communications. We provide a land trust function, which is a wonderful opportunity for a stepping stone between rentals and traditional fee simple home ownership. Land trusts serve in the middle there to give people who've been renters forever an opportunity to get into home ownership and build up some equity. And then lately, we're also the regional organizer for an evictions and foreclosures task force. We've been operating for about the last 2 months out of a grave concern over the number of people who are unemployed and the current inaction we see on a federal and state level around providing the resources to really help people stay in a stable housing situation. That program engages the county court systems, cities and counties, nonprofits, CareerSource, our workforce development board, our United Way, banks, and other organizations, all in a single conversation around what we can do to reduce the number of evictions and foreclosures that we expect to see rising quickly, particularly once the CDC moratorium expires in January. We're looking at how to bring that initiative to our Suncoast region that would include Manatee and Sarasota counties also. So keep you posted on that.
Great.
I think that is probably about my time. So thank you all so very much. It was great to be with you today.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. That's very comprehensive. Really appreciate that. And our last speaker is Geri Lopez from Manatee County. Geri's going to be given the opportunity to host and there she is, and put her,
there we go.
Her slides up. Thank you, Frank.
All
Welcome,
right.
Geri.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Diana. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for the invitation to talk to you all today. You've heard some kind of innovative ideas for affordable housing. So I'm kind of closing up with what Manatee County has been doing. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So just briefly, since we only have a short amount of time, kind of going over Manatee County's 8-point housing strategy, and a lot of this will help um, to reinforce some of the things that you've been hearing about. Usually when I talk about affordable housing, or when I'm asked to talk about affordable housing, a lot of the questions usually is sort of, what is affordable housing? And I usually like to begin in talking is not what, but who is affordable housing. You heard a little bit about the Alice report and about what kind of what that is, but a lot of times it's about putting that face to these acronyms and these names so that we really get an idea of who it is that we're talking about, who it is that we're trying to serve. You heard about at the front end more about the homeless, so that's at the very low end. Here we're looking more kind of at our workforce that is also really struggling to find decent housing. So when we're talking about who is affordable housing, and when I've had these conversations with the Board of County Commissioners, when we began this conversations about 4 years ago, we really started talking about our own employees, because that's really, when it comes down to it, who our workforce is. That's who we're talking about. So the average Manatee County salary for frontline employees, and this is kind of last year's numbers, but it's still roughly about the same. We're talking about $45,000, $46,000. Just looking at a breakout of some of the other some of our other workforce, we're talking librarians at $58,000, law enforcement officers at about $49,550, dental assistants at about $35,000, teachers at $41,000, and then you go all the way down to retail associates, kind of down at $21,000. And even if you're looking at any kind of pay raises in the 3% range, this becomes very difficult, because when you're talking about at that salary, what is it that you can afford, especially if you're looking for a household of 4. This is where you really begin to see what the issue is, especially if we're talking about, this is the demand side of affordable housing. So here at that salary, that about $46,000 or so, you can afford about $1,200 a month for rent and a mortgage of approximately $165,000. So when we're talking about the middle, right, we talk about like this missing middle housing. If you're looking at those making about 100% of the area median income, you can go up a little bit more, about $200,000. Sales price for a home can go up to about $1,400. And those a little bit higher at 120% of our area median income, we can go up to about $225,000. The issue is when we're talking about the supply side of things, the average sales price of a single family home in Manatee County is $325,000. So here's really where you can see that gap between the demand of our workforce who's working for us and what it is that they can afford. Of course, there are some homes that sell for a lot less than that, but there's not that much supply. And then we're looking at about the conditions of them, of like, are they in safe neighborhoods? Are they in the school districts where they want to be? Are they close to work? All really important pieces. When we're looking at rents, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Bradenton is about $1,200. So the same thing there, it's about exactly what that affordability price is, but it goes to a question of supply, of how many units really are there. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about affordable housing. I know that the overall topic here was attainable housing. So a lot of these vocabulary really is interchangeable, but it's really important to talk about, when each of us kind of talk about these terms, exactly what is it that we're talking about. So when those of us in government, when we're talking about affordable housing, I like to talk about what I call like big A and little a affordable housing. The big A really is those units that are subsidized, that there is some government help needed to be able to make them affordable. The little a is more naturally occurring affordable housing. This is just those, a landlord that has like an extra home that's renting it to a family at a very affordable price. So our whole idea and strategy really is to encourage both. We want to encourage those subsidized, because that way we know that we'll have those units that will be able to stay affordable, but also those that just naturally occur in the community. And the thing is we need both, and we definitely need more, because a strong economy really needs kind of our service and our essential employees. And during this pandemic, we've seen how important that is. The other thing I really wanted to touch base about kind of this topic overall in terms of affordable housing or attainable housing, housing affordability in general, is that this is really more than a social and a moral case. There really is a business case for being able to do this and to encourage and for all of us to be getting together to be able to do that. Studies show better school achievement, more productive employees, stronger neighborhoods, stronger tax base. That's a lot of what we do here in my department. So overall, we want to be able to encourage both of those. So how does Manatee kind of approach this? The idea is that in trying to encourage additional housing, there's lots of pain points. So we had, I'm glad that Frank talked about the strategy session that we had with Anthony and the chambers and a whole bunch of our partners a couple of years ago. We really talked about what those pain points were. What are the challenges? What are the barriers? And from there, we came across that there's kind of like these 8 different components that we wanted to look at, because affordable housing isn't a one issue piece. You have to really approach it from lots of different components to be able to really make some progress and make some solutions. So the first one really is from that developer perspective. What will it take to build and sell below $192,000? Right now, that is the county's benchmark for what is affordable housing and what it is that we're trying to subsidize. So working with the developers that are out there about what is it going to take to do that. Looking at the employer side, this one has been one of the most difficult one. How do we engage them to provide solutions to be able to have them be one of the stakeholders, one of them be the partners in helping to get a solution for their employees? From the bank side, how can financial institutions provide more favorable loan products? We talked about the condition of housing, and if a family can go and afford perhaps a small house over in Bayshore Gardens, but it may need a lot of upgrades and improvements, and they may not have those additional funds to be able to do that. How can that be included as part of the private sector solution? Revolving loan funds, Frank talked a little bit about that. Right now, we're having some initial conversations with our credit union to be able to put something like this together so that we can have multiple, whether it's kind of from the workforce side, but also from the housing side, to be able to access some access to capital, which is really important in this conversation. Innovation, what about new materials and processes? Not a lot of movement in here, but something definitely to take a look at. The land development code, this is where we've made the most progress here in Manatee County, is really what's needed for additional density, smaller lots, smaller units. There's been a lot of activity here in as part of Manatee County. We just finished, or we're about to finish, kind of conversation with our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. I see some of our board members here on the call. Lots of really great conversation and ideas to continue the conversations to keep moving forward, because there's still work that needs to be done. Fees, what can we do to right size impact and other fees? Land, this is one where it's really, really difficult. Land keeps going up. So how can we reduce the cost of that land? Could we look at community land trusts? We've had some initial conversations with Frank and the group at Bright to see what are some of the options. So unfortunately, this year we've been set back with COVID and haven't had too much of an opportunity to be able to tackle that, but that's on our work program, and we'll be tackling that very, very shortly. And financial incentives, really, what are some of these alternative ways to get some additional funding? I was really excited to hear about that Housing Opportunity Fund in Central Florida. So it sounds like there's some really good examples out there that we can tackle. So here, in terms of, and I think this is part of Diana's questions, I think I kind of in the part of answering of kind of what are some of the solutions about what we've done in Manatee County. And for the cost of the impact fees, that was one of the first things that we heard that was a real issue. Our solution to that was our Livable Manatee incentive program, where we pay for the full cost of all of the impact fees, not just for the county's fees, but also the school fees and the facility investment fees. And the cost of land, we're looking at that community land trust model, as well as we've set aside some funding for land acquisition. As part of our discussions with our Affordable Housing Committee, we've talked about some other pain points that now, while these may seem very small, they're really important to be able in timing to keep things going. So things like the cost for replacing trees in rental development, or the cost during construction of some of those water connection fees. So these are some recommendations that have been put in place. Other solutions that we have kind of taken a look at, or taking a look at, as I mentioned, is that revolving loan fund, some adaptive reuse for some of the buildings that are here in our redevelopment area, increased density. We've been able to do that as well in Manatee County. The board just had their first reading and discussion on accessory dwelling units. So any additional units that we put into to just be able to increase the supply is going to be really important. And again, continuing to identify those pain points. So just real briefly, some of our results on Livable Manatee. We started the program in August of 2017. We have done 42 single family infills since then. We have 3 rental projects with 308 rental units that are also Livable Manatee. 188 of those are under construction. We started this part with 3.5 million of general fund. We have been able to add an additional 1 million in our tax increment financing, which is the funding for our redevelopment area, to be able to pay for projects that are in those areas. And we have a really strong pipeline of developer interest. We have 4 single family subdivisions with at least 25% units that are affordable. One of them is working with Diana and Habitat for Humanity with Poland Gardens. Those are 16 units, but there's about 121 units total there coming. And we have 1 mixed income rental project also under development, which is about 88 units. So just to show you a quick sample of what this looks like, using just infill lots that are available. This is a Manatee, Livable Manatee infill home, 1,200 square feet, 2 bed, 2 bath. You see the sales price there for $160. Here's where we were able to use some of our other resources to be able to leverage to get these programs going. Here we use the state's program of SHIP, where we did some down payment assistance. And here the impact fees were about almost 12,000. Right now it's running, this was a smaller home, so it was a bit less, but now they're running in the $16,000 to $17,000 per home. This is just a couple shots of the interior, just so you can see what it looks like. Really cute home, lots of light. The owner here just is loving it. And the one I wanted to show you here, this is one of the projects that we do have under construction right now. This is Sandpiper Apartments. The developer is Blue Sky Communities. This is a low-income housing tax credit project. $20 million of total development costs. It is in our redevelopment area, 96 rental units. And we did use our local government contribution to be able to do this. But here you can see kind of that infill, all of the concrete there for the bases there. One real quick thing I wanted to talk about in terms of some missing middle housing ideas. I'm also a member of the Urban Land Institute at ULI, and this is a topic that we have been talking about, so that there are a lot of other organizations out there talking about that. And one thing that the city of St. Pete wants to do is really to encourage more of these smaller kind of 1 to 4 units, and how small developers kind of are able to do that. So they're actually contracting with ULI, and I'm part of that panel, to come up with some financing solutions about how we're able to do this. So this is actually really exciting, because once this report comes out, I think it's going to be transferable and something that a lot of others will be able to use about some of the ideas for additional financing. So I'd like to just end with, in terms of kind of our call to action, there's still a lot of work to be done, but in terms of for you, the audience, is one of the things that's really important is to be able to keep having access to the funds that already are set aside to be able to do affordable housing. And this is the Sadowski Trust Fund, and it helps to fund our SHIP program. Right now, for this year, that money has not been able to be released, so we really do not have access to that money. Luckily, we have some of money from HUD that we've been able to move over to continue to be able to fund our redevelopment programs. This is where we work with kind of our existing seniors for rehabs and our down payment assistance. So we're actually using some of our HUD funds. So we want to be able to encourage the state to continue to fund so that we have access to all the funding that's out there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diana then for the questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all to all of you for the great presentation about some amazing things that are happening. Clearly, there's a lot of hard work being done around the issue of attainable and affordable housing and homelessness elimination. So thank you for the work you guys are doing. What I thought I would do now is just take a few minutes to have our speakers talk a little bit more about the process of allowing communities or encouraging communities to get to the point where these more systematic approaches and efforts happen. It's very easy, I'm sure, for communities to get really focused on the end product, which is really important ultimately, but to step back and to do what is being done in some communities where it's data driven and there's more of a systematic approach. Can you talk a little bit about that, Bethany, maybe, and Frank, from your perspective outside of our county in particular, what's worked in your communities in terms of that shift? Maybe was there a need for that shift? Did it happen? How did it happen? Those kinds of things. Either one, anybody want to speak to that? That'd be great.
Frank, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I think a big part of it has been our realization that we all feel like we're working harder and harder every year, but then when we look at the numbers, we realize we're farther and farther behind every year. The biggest single dynamic driving this, of course, is the cost of building housing is going up way faster than average workforce wages are, right? So it gets more and more expensive to build a house, and people's ability to buy that house or to rent that apartment or home gets farther and farther behind. And we're in an era where we have fewer and fewer public sector resources to do it. So we've realized that we've got to do a better job of coordinating, not just relying on these traditional programs, but we've got to figure out how to incentivize the private sector to get involved here and what incentives really make that worthwhile. So that's a whole bunch of relatively wonky things like density bonuses and parking waivers and fast tracking of permitting that make it just a little bit easier to get things developed, along with things like this Central Florida Housing Opportunity Fund that let us cover some of the cost in exchange for incentivizing the creation of more units like we know what we need.
Right. Bethany, do you have some comments about that as well?
Well, in many of the communities that we've worked in, one of the things we hear over and over again is, and now I'm talking about specifically homelessness, not necessarily the housing side, is they may have had a perception of who was homeless or what their homeless population was made of. But then when they actually created a by name list and started talking to people, they had a very different understanding of who their homeless population was. So, for example, Lynchburg, Virginia just solved for veterans homelessness in August. And one of the things they told us was they actually thought that their homeless population was much larger. So their PIT count, their point in time count was large. I don't remember the exact numbers. But what they realized when they started actually doing a by name list, talking to each homeless person, talking to the communities and the organizations and their community that are working with them, is they had a lot of transient homeless folks moving through the community. So where they thought they had 46 homeless veterans or veterans experiencing homelessness, they actually had 12, for example, because a lot of them weren't from the community, weren't planning on staying, were just moving through. And so then when they did that, they realized, well, 12, that is a much easier number to solve than 48. And these, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers, but that was one light bulb moment. And I think another, to what Frank is talking about, another light bulb moment is actually thinking about what kind of housing resources their community needed. Do they need, so while many people are thinking about, obviously you want permanent housing solutions, do they need rapid rehousing? Do they need supportive housing? Is what the kind of housing resources that they're developing, is that what the community needs to meet their needs? And that was something else that really became clear when they started actually seeing what were the makeup of the people experiencing homelessness in their community. I hope
Right.
that.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I think, Geri, you by your presentation, speaking to who, who is homeless, who is the, attainable housing, who is housing, rather than, what is housing, is an attempt to do that as well, is to put a face on the issues as well. So I hear in all three of you, at least I'm hearing that data is such an important piece of this. The true data, not just the point in time, but it's really a full sense of the individuals that are impacted. And then I think also from the other side of it is, once you have the numbers of people and the reality of who they are, that your solutions are addressing that particular segment, as opposed to generally trying to solve, attainable housing in the broader sense. So that seems to have been effective in your communities as well. Because there's lots of solutions, and we could be running around doing a lot of solutions, but in order to make it measurable and effective, can we actually focus it? So that's really good. I'm curious about some of the ways in which you got to these solutions. Were they in fact community driven, or were they municipality driven? Or was it, obviously it's a little bit of both, but would you say the forces came from either the groundswell was what brought it up to your attention, or where do you think it's come from in terms of your communities?
I'd like to just start
Go
a
ahead,
little bit
Geri.
just from the Livable Manatee program real quick. That was definitely community driven, because that was something that when you're talking about affordable housing, sometimes you have a lot of nonprofit groups that are doing this, that just focus on this. But in Manatee County, there's actually a group of just for-profit developers that are mission driven, that want to do the right thing and want to provide this. And they were saying, here's our barrier. Our barrier is the cost of these impact fees. If you help us with this, we can provide more product. So then we set to work on how can we provide that solution. So that one was a direct response. And there's a couple others when we're looking at these developer pain points that are very much community driven. So from that perspective, that part was.
Good, thank you. Bethany, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say really quickly, one of the things, so our methodology is very community driven. It takes, one of the number one requirements is that the community has to be committed to it. But then one of the things that we have found is the communities that are most successful, and this is not going to surprise anyone, is that their elected officials and municipality leaders are at the table, invested, and are also working towards the goal with them. So we have many communities, well, not maybe many, where last mile communities where there's just a little bit more, or we found the barriers are really systemic, policy driven, et cetera. And if we could just change some of those incentives at the policy level, at the municipality level, then we could get further. So definitely
makes sense.
And I would just add a big piece of the realization for us has been getting the business community to the table. We've organized a specific housing action team that includes, bank CEOs, the realtor organization, the apartment association, several of the major employers, several major developers, to talk about how do we make some headway on this issue, because your big employers understand what it is like to not be able to attract their workforce because there's not sufficient housing at a price that people can afford at what the workforce is earning. One of the biggest insights there was looking at the Sadowski Trust Fund that Geri mentioned. I said in one of our meetings, and this became kind of a touch point for future conversations, in the city of Orlando, for instance, there are enough funds to subsidize construction of 7 or 8, maybe 10 single-family homes, given the way that the legislature raids the Sadowski Trust Fund every year. But if we got the entire allocation, it might be 65 homes in a city with a gap of thousands and thousands and thousands of units, right? We have, I think, let ourselves off the hook for years, pretending that if only we got the full Sadowski allocation, everything would magically be better. And that's not at all the case. So we really need the community at the table driving this to say that there are things the public sector critically has to do, the policy things, the funding incentives, but
Right.
a lot of this has to come from the other side.
Right.
To
And I
get to
think
scale.
that's one of the challenges in Manatee County is that municipalities like Manatee County are working, government are working really hard at this issue. And then Geri has that 8 points of all those other elements that need to be engaged. And so, in terms of a comprehensive, systematic kind of approach, truly getting individuals to the table on, rather than just the municipalities or the nonprofits that are doing is really important. Can anybody give us some thoughts about maybe bringing those businesses to the table? Was there some creative conversations? Was it incentives from them that came? I mean, what brought the businesses to the table? And Bethany, I'm assuming you have had businesses engaged in these processes as well. What brings them?
I think for us, it's largely the business community is very excited to be part of the conversation when it's framed around their concerns. So if what we're talking about is affordable housing because people can't afford housing, we're framing this the wrong way to engage the business community. When we're talking about where does your workforce live, what's your workforce retention like? Does it get harder and harder to hire the people you want and then to keep them on staff? That's true for your school systems and your big hospital systems and things like that. I think every county we've talked to, everywhere we work in Florida, the school system will tell you we have a really terrible time attracting new teachers and then keeping them on board past their first 3, 4, 5 years because there's no housing relative to what they earn. Same thing for, entry level staff at hospitals and other big employers. So when you frame it that way, all of a sudden the business community goes, oh yeah, I have that problem. How do we work together to solve that problem?
Right. Good point. Bethany, any thoughts, or Geri, any thoughts on the business community? And
one thing that I'd like to point out is when we're talking about, and I think Frank was the one that mentioned it, and it's a really important point for all of us to keep in mind, is one of the reasons why we're having this housing crisis is because wages aren't keeping up with the cost of housing. So employers really do need to be a critical part of that process. So one thing that we're doing on the economic development side is when we are working with businesses to provide incentives to creating some of these jobs, we actually have some additional incentives where they get bonuses if they're hiring local. And if they're hiring kind of near, so that we're giving, I know one of the questions was about kind of like inclusivity and equity, and how do we do that? So when you do have places like hospitals that are usually in kind of your more urban areas, or perhaps some of your manufacturing that located is really looking at the area around it of those people that are already there and hiring from those areas. So we're giving some additional bumps and incentives for them to be able to hire local. So I think that's a really important piece, is to be able to begin to link some of your housing strategies with your economic development strategies so that they're working together.
Great, thank you. Bethany, any last thought? And then we'll open it to some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, when it comes to solving homelessness, it definitely needs to have all buy-in. And sometimes I think like some of the big employers or corporations, they might not think of it as part of their issues, maybe not be part of their workforce. However, it is part of the social fabric of their community. And the more we take care of our people, the more desirable our communities are, the easier it is to attract workers, more people want to stay. So definitely those framing messages are helpful as well.
Great, thank you. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and there's a couple of individual questions, and let me see if I can kind of pull them together and see if there's some ways to answer it. One of the questions that came in was about the question of major developers and their impact and the issue around housing and affordable housing. We were talking about partners, business partners in particular. I think sometimes there's this tension between big builders, and they should be, and then everybody else, and could anybody speak to the engagement of and the ability and interest to kind of bring those partners together, and have had any successes with that or interactions with that? I mean, I know, Geri, obviously you're working with big builders to do what you're doing, but in terms of the conversation and the solution-driven and more systematic solutions, any thoughts about involvement with big builders?
So I'll just give like a couple quick thoughts. This is one that's really a real challenging topic, and that's because when you're talking about these big developers, a lot of them have kind of their niche of who it is that they are building to. So they may have like the really larger homes where they're building in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. So no matter what incentive you put together, those developers are not going to be interested in doing kind of affordable housing. So it's really trying to get to some of these other developers that may have that. And when land is really easy to get, they're not going to be interested in a lot of incentives because they don't need the density and they don't need some of those. So it's when it becomes a little bit difficult, that's when we have a little bit more traction. And I have had conversations with like Lennar Homes, for example, about what could some of that be. Now they're having some of their price points be more in the a little bit more upper workforce, but it really comes to how the community wants to approach it in terms of a carrot or a stick, right? So the stick is kind of those mandatory things like you have to do some of these things, and Manatee County hasn't really looked at it from that perspective. We've been really more on the carrot side of what are the incentives, what are we doing? So that's how we're doing it. So so those are some conversations that if you're looking to be able to expand that is what, you know, looking at that bigger picture. But
Right.
land really has a really big part of it of how you bring that into the equation and what's the product that they're doing. Again, going back to the data of who's looking for homes, what are the supply and at what price points, and what does it take to be able to get to that.
Yeah, yeah. Frank, any last thoughts?
One of the most interesting presentations I saw on this about 3 years ago, Central Florida, Osceola, Orange, Seminole counties, and the city of Orlando put together a joint task force on housing affordability that rotated through the counties. And so the last one of these, the last panel discussion was led by one of the major developers who's built hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of housing over 20 years around the region. And he said, let me answer your question this way. I am just a dumb developer. And everybody in the room laughs, right? You know, you've made how many millions of dollars being a dumb developer. He said, please don't come to me after the fact and tell me I'm not building what you want me to build, because what I'm doing is looking at your rule book and figuring out how to make money building that. So if you want different things built, change the rule book, and then I'll figure out a way to make money within the new set of rules. But don't come to me after the fact and say, well, these are the rules, but you're not building enough affordable housing. I think it's incumbent on us to nudge a little bit to get more different things built, because developers by and large, and you know, we're a developer also, we're good at building a few specific kinds of products. And until somebody says, well, that's not exactly what we need here, and changes the rule a little bit, we continue to do the same things because we know what works.
Right.
We have to restructure a little bit to get some different things built.
Well said, well said. Bethany, any last minute thought you want to share?
No, I think everyone really summed it up well. And I know that we're at the end of it. So,
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to our speakers. Housing, attainable housing, homelessness is a really, really big issue. But I think today, hopefully, we've found some hope in some creative solutions, maybe some new perspectives on the way in which we as a community and here in Manatee County can approach it. I'm hoping that maybe with the League of Women Voters, there may be some call to action that can come out of this work as well. I know there was some comments about support of the Sadowski Trust Fund. That's an important one that we can all easily, a call to action we can all easily take on. I know, Bethany, there's probably a lot of questions about your program and how we might be able to consider it here in Manatee County. So hopefully maybe we can have some more conversations with you as well. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and for our fabulous speakers helping us tackle the problems and the challenges and the hope and the future of attainable housing in our areas as well. So thank you all for your time.